Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone who is here. My name is Christina Parle. I am the Director of Chapter Services and Conduct for Zeta Beta Tau Fraternity. I have been doing this program for some time. It's odd. It took me probably almost 4 years to get off of the ground because it is a tough topic. And I think some people really struggle with their language and what to say and what not to say and being scared to say the wrong thing. And so those are all the things that we're going to talk about this evening. What I will tell you is you are more than welcome at any time to drop a question into the chat box or a thought or a comment or even message it to me directly. I won't catch it immediately, probably every time, but I am happy to talk through it with any of you. So you are here to talk about relearning how to talk to each other. So this is really rooted in the concept of language and the fact that words mean things. So what we will start with is really talking about why this topic matters. One, ZBT has a very huge emphasis as an organization on anti-hate, right? And so this is a way that we can decrease hate through our words. And so we'll talk about the different ways in which language really matters and the impact that it has, but also how we can decrease hate through that. And then this is one of the little things that sometimes makes a big difference. So for some people, it's kind of like, well, words don't matter. That's not that big of a deal. But for some people, they make the biggest difference, right? Any minor change in our language and the words that we say to folks can make a huge difference for others. And so this is one of those, it doesn't take a lot of effort from us, things that can help kind of change the world ultimately. So a couple of things up front. I always like to set expectations up front for those on the call who work with me. You probably know this, you've heard me say this, but the big one is to be present. So I acknowledge that everybody has a lot of stuff going on, right? Whether it is kids, family, cell phone is being in, whatever it may be, but I ask that you be present as much as you're able at this point. So flipping over your phone, telling people to wait a second, whatever you can, be present with us tonight. And then, like I said, ask questions and participate. Taylor is my go-to person who is going to break us out into breakout rooms as we kind of talk this evening. And so when you are in those breakout rooms, please participate. It's really only going to be you and one other person, so it could be weird if you don't participate. So please feel free to do that when you're in breakouts. Next is a commitment to giving grace. And these conversations are hard. And so I ask that you commit to giving yourself grace and to giving others grace. Whether it's a question that you have that you're like, oh my gosh, this is so silly, people are going to think it's dumb, we won't. Because this is a non-judgment experience, and I think everybody deserves to learn at their own pace. And so giving yourself grace, but also giving others grace as you talk with folks. And then next is really acknowledging your own implicit bias, your frustrations, your ignorance. And ignorance, sometimes I think people are like, that's a mean word. And the reality is the root of ignorance is just, I don't know. I haven't been educated on that. Nobody's shared that with me. And so just being really tapped into the things that you're not aware of as we kind of go through this conversation, as well as kind of those automatic kind of unintentional things that creep into your brain when you think about different types of people and different types of situations, which would be implicit bias. And we will break that down a little bit more in a little bit. And then the last one is just to be vulnerable and uncomfortable in order to learn. So really vulnerable meaning I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about yourself, share your thoughts. So being vulnerable enough to do those things, but then also being uncomfortable enough to learn, because we don't typically learn in our comfort zone. And especially on a conversation like this, we don't typically learn in our comfort zone. So joining me and getting a little bit uncomfortable in order to make the world hopefully a better place. So couple of things, what you need to know about words up front. One, you do not have to be a social justice warrior, woke, or even a liberal to have this conversation. All you have to do is care about people and care about them enough to be better for the humans. One of the tenets of ZBT's credo is social responsibility, and this is our social responsibility, to care enough about people to be better and to help them in ways that are mostly effortless for us as humans. The next is you will mess stuff up. You will say the wrong thing, you will do the wrong thing, and that's okay. This is hard. It is hard to go from saying words and things that you said your entire life to realizing, oh wow, that impacts people in a negative way, and you're going to mess it up along the way. I do it all of the time, but what is most important is that you acknowledge that mess up, and you are better next time. Next is you can count on it changing. It is unrealistic that the language that we talk about today will even be the same potentially next year or 5 years from now. One of the examples that I always typically give is African American. A lot of people have gotten really used to using the language African American, but as you've seen, really, especially over the last couple of months, people really, I think really getting behind the concept of using the word Black. And the reality is that African American is a subset of Black people. And I think we had gotten really comfortable to associate African American with all people who had Black skin. The reality is a lot of Black folks don't have any tie or lineage that they can find in their family to Africa. Now, realistically, maybe somewhere way, way back there was, but maybe they identify as Haitian or St. Lucian or Jamaican or whatever that may be. And so Black is one of those terms that it's like, yeah, it's okay. You can say that. That's the most, representative word at this point in time. So it will change, right? The next thing is that some things bother some people and some things don't bother other people. And that is okay. So understanding that really this conversation around words and language is dependent on how well you know the person. I had a student one time say, Christina, you're telling me that I shouldn't always say Mr. and Mrs. And he said, but my aunts and my uncles would lose it if I didn't do that. And I said, and that's okay. You already have an established relationship with them enough to know what they want and what they don't want, what helps make them feel cared for, loved, respected, whatever that may be. And so, of course, this conversation may look different with people that you know really well, but understanding that we're really talking about more so those more initial interactions and experiences with people. And then lastly, much of what we say, whether it's written, oral, signing, whatever that may be, is informed by our implicit biases. And like I said earlier, implicit biases are those automatic associations, those involuntary, unconscious thoughts that we have that a lot of times don't even represent what we truly believe. And a lot of that is learned through what we see, what we hear on the television media, what we've grown up around, whatever that may be. I always tell folks one of the biggest implicit biases I have is when I get on a plane and they talk about the pilot, I always kind of assume it's going to be a white man. And I always kind of assume he's going to be older, right? And I might even have some assumptions about his physical build. And that's okay, but the reality is that I have to be able to check that, acknowledge it, and then be better at the next time. And so those are all of the things that it's really important to understand up front about words. So again, if you've got thoughts, if you've got questions, if you've got a heck no or a heck yeah, feel free to drop that in the chat. So the next thing is that language really is step one. So one of the things that is challenging about the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion work or social justice work is that a lot of people want to jump from zero to cultural appropriation or microaggressions or social constructs without ever even understanding the basics. Because you can understand microaggressions and all of those things all day, but if you use language that is exclusive and invalidates who I am as a person, I'm likely not going to be able to hear you anymore. And so really understanding that language is that first kind of gateway to some of those next level concepts. Language is also one of the major forms that we communicate and express ourselves. Again, whether it's written, oral, any of those things, if you're signing it, doesn't matter, but it is one of the biggest ways we communicate. So I always get the question from folks, well, doesn't tone and delivery, really, really impact this conversation? Absolutely. But the reality is that there are some words, no matter your tone, no matter your delivery, that are still going to be exclusive. Even, and we'll talk about this, whether you intended for it to be negative or you didn't, whatever that means, that still has an impact. And so really thinking about those things and understanding that those first interactions with people really set the tone for how people feel about you. So typically in the first 5 seconds, right, of connecting with someone, they're thinking, is this person going to judge me? Am I safe with them? Will they care about me? So I want you all to think reflectively, what are the words that you use imply about you? Things that you say on an everyday basis, the things that you share into the world. What do they, and so the reality about that is that we don't likely even notice some of the things that we say are rooted in someone else's like oppression or things of that nature, because it's not rooted in our own oppression, and that's okay. But again, really it starts with acknowledging it. So what I would like to do, Taylor, if you could help me on this, I want you all to talk together, but I want to communicate there is such a power in storytelling and actually hearing other people's stories. And so what we want to do is spend a couple of minutes with you and one other person who is here sharing a little bit about your experience and about your story. And so as you do that, I would like for you to also talk about one specific topic that you feel particularly not confident about when it comes to the topic that we're talking about today. And so Taylor, I know we've got a few people, so if we could break them out into their groups, you'll have about 3 to 5 minutes to do that. And we'll project the question into the breakout room too, so you don't forget. Are there enough people? Do you need to, okay. I was gonna say, do you need to send Anthony too?
Yeah, we had a joiner, so I sent Anthony with him. Okay, I'm gonna broadcast this.
Thank you.
Share a little bit about your story in one area around today's topic that you're not super confident in.
Are you chilling, Libby?
I don't feel good. That's why I'm not on camera.
That's weird. I did not feel good at all today either. I felt like almost nauseous. It was weird.
I had to stay home, so I didn't, like I had a below normal temperature today. I was like 97 degrees. And so, and I normally wouldn't think anything of it, but you know, like they say with, and I don't have COVID or anything, but you know, that heightens your awareness. And then I had head issues and tummy issues, and I'm like, just a crap day. So.
Oh, God.
That's why, like, when we're with everybody else, I'll put the camera off because I don't think they need to see me laying on the couch or the cat walking by. And she was mad that I made her move the.
Oh my gosh.
She successfully drank out of 4 different water cups today that I've had to go, because like I'll have it on the table next to me working on stuff, and in my house she can sit on the arm of the couch and the table's a little bit below, and she dips in there, and I'm like, fuck, I go get another cup, and I try to cover it or whatever, and I forgot, and I lay down, and next thing I know, her butt's in the air and her head's in my cup over there, and I'm like, well, crap, we've been through 4 cups today.
Oh my gosh. That's hilarious.
So the Stanley Rothbart also left.
Oh.
So Anthony's just by himself.
Okay.
Do you want me to project a second message?
Yes.
So Anthony's in there dancing with himself.
Taylor, are you managing? Because I know Melissa, when she was on, she was like managing the recording. And so I think we'll just have to go in and edit these parts out.
Yeah, I would pause and stop, but I know I'll screw that up. So we'll just clip it out.
I think that's smart. I love it. Yeah, gosh. Okay, we will give them at least another minute and a half.
Okay.
Because I think we went in at 7:14. Stanley's back.
Oh, Stanley is back.
He'll come in here first, I think. You did that so quickly, Taylor.
Nailed it.
I hurry up and got off the camera. Again, doesn't need to see me laying on the couch. Have you guys seen, and I didn't know about it till today, Josh Gad does this Reunited Apart. So he brings back casts of old movies to be reunited and talk about their movies. So I watched one for Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yes.
And it was really interesting. And because I was kind of messing around between the end of work and the executive group call today. And then they have one for Ghostbusters. If these are ever movies that you watched, you know. Christina, probably not. You weren't even born.
Oh my God. I don't know if I was born when Ghostbusters came out, but I definitely watched it.
What year were you born?
1992.
Yeah, no, because it came out in 1984.
I have 2 years on you, and I still have never seen it.
I'm gonna go lay down again now and just forget about you too. I'm just kidding.
Okay, Taylor, if you want to give them the countdown, I don't know how long you do it. 60.
Give me 15 seconds. All
Yeah,
right. 11, 10, 9. I'm not going to count down.
Okay, thank you for everybody. We'll wait as
No
everybody.
problem. Are you back?
We're all
Good.
back.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so if you are back in the space, people go ahead and get started. If you would mute your mic so there's not a lot of background noise, we will keep going. So if you were in a space with another person, please feel free to drop your thoughts, one specific thing that you feel particularly not super confident about on this topic, or a question that came up in your space. Feel free to drop that in the chat function, should be at the bottom of your screen. So as we move along, there are 4 major reasons why language is particularly important. The first one really starts with respect, right? A lot of times we think about language as a sensitivity thing, but the truth is it's really a respect thing. It's a mental health thing. It's an inclusivity thing. And when we think about respect, that's typically a foundational piece of almost any and all, interactive settings that we engage in, whether it's acquaintances or friends or whatever that may be. Respect is typically given and earned, and those kind of things. It's typically an exchange. One of the definition pieces of respect is a sufficient attention to all factors. And I think that is particularly where language plays in, is that language is one of those sufficient attention pieces to who you are as a human. And so really the foundation is laid with the concept of respect. Second is that really language is important to being a leader. Now, don't hear me wrong. You can be a leader and use exclusive language all day long. But the truth is that in order to have credibility, for people to trust you, for people to appreciate your leadership and those kinds of things, it's important to be inclusive of all humans. And so really when we think about being a leader, I always talk about, somebody, you could be leading a team at work, and people are really excited about you being the team leader. And then you get to talking and you're using all of this language that is really exclusive of the people that are on your team. You're going to lose credibility with that team, and likely they're going to be asking themselves questions about their safety and if they can be, like if you're going to judge them in that space, if you know things about them. And so really thinking about that as one of the pillars of language and its importance. The third is mental health. I think many people would agree we are in a crisis when it comes to mental health in this country. And mental health is really tied to this sense of belonging, which inevitably is tied to the words that we hear, right? And so I think the truth is that our mental health issues increase when people don't feel seen, and they don't feel heard, and they don't feel cared for. And a lot of that happens through the words that we use. The truth is, though, is that also a lot of past trauma can be triggered by words that we use. And so really thinking about how language can impact the mental health of someone. I've heard my entire life, right? My mom works in education. I've heard my entire life, if you call a kid stupid his whole life, he may believe that about himself, or they may believe that about themselves. And that's true. If my entire life I heard derogatory stories about myself, or, an identity that I have, or stereotypical jokes, or constantly hear negative comments, that may start to take a toll on who I am. So that may stunt my identity development, my growth, how I see myself being able or capable of something. It also may impact my past traumas. But the truth is on the other side, if we're using really inclusive language, people are going to feel acknowledged. They're going to feel affirmed. They're going to feel cared for, and potentially in many ways like they belong. So right now we're in the state of affairs where people are demanding that they be acknowledged. We're no longer in the era of intolerance and acceptance. We're really in this space where people are demanding that they be acknowledged, and that their humanity, truly, who they are as a human, be respected, and to feel like they're not on the outside all of the time. And so I think one of the biggest issues is that we don't think about the lasting impact of our words and how it can inevitably impact mental health on ourselves, on others, all of those things. We don't realize that something that we said that we've long forgotten may never leave the brain, the mind of the person that we said it to. And so words are powerful because they're not retractable, and you don't get to decide whose feelings you hurt with them. So you have to really be thinking about that at all points. And then the fourth big reason is why not, right? Why not use inclusive language? Because it's not hard. It doesn't have any major effect on us in regards to, yeah, it's going to be hard to you might mess it up sometimes, but it's not going to have some huge burden on your life. And truly, using inclusive language is helpful because you really never know, right? It's easier that way and naturally tends to keep you out of some weird and awkward situations. And so really using inclusive language can be super helpful in that regard. One thing that, and most folks on this call may be familiar with this, but the Anti-Defamation League does what they call the pyramid of hate. And what's really important about this is that it, kind of has this larger piece at the bottom that then of course becomes much bigger. The truth is that the bottom of this pyramid is so much bigger where it says biased attitudes, because likely this is where most people are engaging, right? We don't typically have people who get all the way up the pyramid to genocide, but most of us are always engaging in biased attitudes, whether again, intentionally or unintentionally. And so the reality is that these lower levels are supporting the upper levels. And as we move through each block, these behaviors are being normalized, or nobody's saying anything, or they're not interrupting or disrupting whatever is occurring in the moment. And so you'll see in acts of bias, non-inclusive language lives in that space. And so realistically, if we allow people to tell derogatory stories, jokes, say one-offs, and we don't say anything, that's being normalized. And some of those people are going farther and farther up the pyramid because they think it's okay. And we effectively have said it's okay by saying nothing. When behavior goes unchecked, language or drinking or whatever it may be, when negative behavior goes unchecked, it becomes normalized and likely will become more severe, or it will spread to others, or it will create a new issue. And so we're always looking to kind of check some of that behavior in order to help not lead to systemic discrimination or bias motivated violence or genocide. And so we can interrupt the escalation of people making their way up this pyramid. But if we don't do it at the lower levels, it becomes harder and harder as we get to each different block. So Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people." I don't love identifying people as good and bad people, but the truth is that the good people that he is likely talking about tend to be the bystanders. Tend to be the people who hear it, know it's a bad thing, and then don't say anything because they're nervous or worried or don't want to impact the relationship. And that's where we want to kind of figure out how to be active in those spaces and how to intervene when situations like that are going on. So again, if you've got thoughts or have questions about the pyramid of hate, please feel free to drop those in the questions or in the chat function. So Deborah Lipstadt, who came to Zeta Beta Tau's convention last summer, says no genocide began with actions. It started with words. And I think this quote is so powerful because it is true, right? Many times there is some type of initial conversation or argument that has led to genocide or war or a fight or whatever it may be. Replace genocide with whatever you'd like, but typically it starts with words. And so we have to stop believing that words are not powerful. So we're going to break into breakout rooms again, and we're going to kind of do them back to back. So I want to just mentally prepare you for that now. But I want to talk a little bit about when exclusive language is used. And typically it's used in 4 different ways. One is people are just being assuming, they're not really thinking about it, and they're just assuming something about a person and they're using exclusive language. Second is a personal hurt, right? Either they've experienced something, been taught something, or learned something that has caused them to have a bit of a ouch spot about this particular person or community. And so there's some version of personal hurt that they've experienced as a result. The third is they don't care, right? They probably know better and they just don't care. They don't care about being hurtful. They don't care about your feelings or how words impact you. They're just saying or doing whatever they'd like. And then the fourth one is pure ignorance, right? I didn't know. I haven't been educated on this topic. It was unclear. A lot of people will say, Christina, what's the difference between ignorance and assuming? And I always say, ignorance is when my 86-year-old grandmother calls Black folks colored because she just doesn't realize that that is not the language that we use in 2020. Versus assuming is when you walk up to somebody who identifies as a woman and you say, excuse me, sir, because of how they physically look. And you're just assuming something based on that. And so what we will do now is we will go into breakout rooms. And what I want you all to talk about is different examples of these ways in which exclusive language shows up. You can give an example that's happened to you or an example that has happened to somebody else or that you've seen. And if you only get to 2 of them, great. If you get to all 4 of them, that's even better. But we will take a few minutes right now and have you all break out into your breakouts to talk about these different types of exclusive language. And so Taylor, they'll pop back in here and I will talk about both of these slides. And
Okay.
and then when they come back, we're going to kind of go back through them. So.
It cut off the message, so I have to broadcast it twice, like in 2 parts. It like literally wouldn't let me go on.
Weird. I wonder if it was just too long.
Stanley thinks Anthony is Taylor and then was privately chatting me.
Love that. I love that for you.
It was funny. Libby, are you still here?
No.
No. So I'm sorry, you said you were going to do the next 2 slides and then we're going to hop back into them.
Yeah, so they're going to do both slides while they're in this, like in the breakout.
Can that be broadcasted?
Not right now. When they come back, I'll explain it.
Okay. Okay. I gotcha. I'm going to reopen that.
Okay, can we give them a 30-second? Actually, let's do like a 45-second countdown.
I'll broadcast that don't forget to think, and then wait 30 seconds and bring them back in 15.
Yeah.
Broadcast. All right, closing.
Okay, hello everybody. As you're coming back, please feel free to drop comments in the chat. So what are some examples or questions that you had that came up in your breakout with your other person? So please feel free to drop thoughts in the comments. What we're going to talk about, these next two slides we're going to do together. So like I said, we're going to bop in and out of the breakouts. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is a negative comment that didn't involve malicious intent, that happened to you personally, right? And if you can see on the screen, I'd like for you to talk with your person about the reason why, you know, that the comment was made, whether they were assuming or being ignorant or personal hurt or didn't care, whatever that may be. And what was the impact on you, right? Was it impact on your identity, on your self-worth, your confidence, how you felt you belonged, or something else? And then you can talk a little bit about what would have made the difference. If they would have changed this word or that word, or if they would have just not said it at all. But thinking about a negative comment that didn't involve malicious intent, and we will broadcast that into the space. But then the second thing that I want you to talk about with your partner is the concept of a time when someone was inclusive and thoughtful and intentional about their language, and what really stood out about that, right? So first, a negative comment, something that maybe they didn't have any malicious intent, and then second is a time when they were really inclusive and thoughtful and intentional. So Taylor, if you can break us back out into the rooms, we will broadcast the information in there, and then we will bring everybody else back.
So go ahead and broadcast the first question, and then in a few minutes do the second part, and then let me see if I can post both of them. Yeah, I can only do one at a time. Oh, unmute yourself. I can't hear you.
I said, I think that's fine. Just do the first one, and then in a minute or two, we could do the second one.
This is a killer presentation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Taylor.
I forgot to turn my camera back on, but I was bowing.
that would have made a big difference.
Oh dear. My dogs are going crazy, by the way. That's why I've just kept my camera off and muted.
I love it. That's funny. That is okay. We might go a couple minutes over, just FYI, based on kind of where we're at right now. So.
Do you want me to go ahead and broadcast the second part now?
Yeah, that would be great.
There we go.
You know, who all have you done this program for?
AFLV, Iowa State. I feel like somebody else, I can't remember. Yeah. I talk about bits and pieces of it in a lot of the other presentations, but this full presentation, only a few groups.
Okay. Well, I mean, this would be something good for a summit.
Yeah, absolutely. Pieces of it for sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't feel better. And I'm not participating.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
I'm absorbing and listening.
Good. Good. It's gonna get good. I mean, better.
No, I know. I'm good. I'm gonna go get some more water though here. Oh, but you can't see because I'm not on screen. I'm gonna go ahead and mute in case they come back while I'm gone.
Okay. Taylor, if you want to give them the 30 seconds. Are you there, Taylor?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're okay. And you don't have to do the remember to put something in the chat. You can just do 30 seconds.
All right. There we go.
This one, but that was quick. I know.
Too quick. We need more time.
So quick. So part of the reason why I'm pulling you back is because I do want to respect everybody's time. But thank you for kind of jumping in and out of breakouts. And hopefully you can keep thinking about those questions, right? So as you see on the screen, thinking about the negative comment, what it was, why the person did it, and those kinds of things, while also thinking about a time when somebody was really thoughtful. I'll never forget the time that a young Jewish man in one of my presentations, he rose his hand for this slide and said, "This opportunity right here, I feel so not judged." I was like, "Oh, that's precious." And so we had a really long conversation afterwards, and he was like, "I've never had somebody use Jewish examples in a presentation." And so it was just fascinating, and it was a really cool opportunity and not something that we often think about. So want to make sure if you have thoughts or want to drop your thoughts in the chat, please feel free to do so. But we are going to keep moving on. So one of the first things that I want to talk about kind of post thinking of those things is to challenge our mind, right? And one of the first things that I want to challenge us on is we've probably all heard at some point in our lives, treat others how you want to be treated, right? This is the rule. This is what a lot of us have been taught in many ways. And so feel free to drop your comments if you agree or disagree, if you've heard this or haven't heard this. But the reality is we want to reframe this concept of treat others how they want to be treated, right? Because truly, treating people fairly often means that you sometimes are going to have to treat them differently. Don't let them suffer. It's going to have to look different. And in many ways, that's equity. A lot of times we want to talk about the concept of equality. And in a lot of ways, that's not what's going to help us push forward as a society. We're going to have to create equitable opportunities for people to advance that likely will involve treating them how they want to be treated or what they need in order to advance as a people, rather than that equality piece. The reality is too, is that we already treat people how they want to be treated in a lot of ways. We love to talk about Enneagrams or love languages or your, Myers-Briggs or how you receive feedback or different learning styles, right? Audio, visual, those kinds of things. And so there's already a lot of ways in which we do that. And so we want to challenge everybody here to really think about, am I treating others how I want to be treated? Or am I treating them how they want and need to be treated? And so really challenging your mind there. The next one is words only have power if you give it to them. I used to hear this all the time as a younger human. My parents very much operated from this perspective. And the reality is that for some folks, this is true. And I would often argue that many times that is for some of our most privileged individuals in our society, that words only have power if I give it to them, right? But the reality is that we don't get to decide. And I've talked about this, right? But the level of power is really only decided and determined by the receiver, right? Again, words are not retractable. So once they're out there, it doesn't matter what your intention was. Truly, it matters what the impact was on the person who heard them. So understanding that we as individuals don't get to decide for someone else how words did or did not impact them, or the power that they did or did not give them. The third one is my favorite. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? I feel like this is a big one for a lot of folks. A lot of people have heard this growing up. But the truth is that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will most likely hurt me and have an impact long after they've been said, right? So the truth is that, yeah, words are probably going to hurt. They're probably going to hurt me. And sometimes I can shrug it off, and sometimes it will stick with me for the rest of my life. And so there are things, I don't really have a great memory, especially long-term. There are things that I can specifically, vividly remember where I was, what was happening when somebody said something. And so the truth is right now as people, in many ways, we're reaping the benefits. That mental health crisis that I talked about earlier, we are reaping the benefits of sticks and stones, never breaking our bones, and words, are always hurting us, really, truly, right? And so many people at the metaphorical hands of words have been hurting us. And so really thinking and challenging ourselves when we hear this type of rhetoric. So the big takeaway from this, right, is that your intent does not negate your impact. Your intent in a decision and a comment is wildly important. It is very, very important to how you came to make this decision, but it doesn't negate the impact on someone else, right? So I may not have intended to get in your way and you fell over, but you still fell over, right? Like, that's just the truth. So although intention is an important part, it's not the whole thing. Second is you don't get to decide, right? You don't get to decide for others how things land for them, and that's okay. And we've got to kind of be okay in that space. And lastly, just because it doesn't affect you or didn't affect you doesn't mean it doesn't hurt someone else, right? And so really being mindful and thoughtful about those concepts. Next is saying the right thing and when you don't. So this one I think is where a lot of people get tied up. The reality is it's not an if, it is in fact a when. You will say something silly or inappropriate or whatever. I recently remember being with a colleague who uses the pronouns they, them, their. I constantly was using the pronouns he, him, his, because the person in my implicit bias, automatic association brain saw this individual as very masculine. So I used he, him, his all the time. And the reality is even in the work that I do, this was happening. And so what I had to do was apologize, right? And that was tough. That was not easy, but I also didn't make a scene. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to apologize in an effective way a little bit later. Another thing is if you're not really sure, learn their story. Ask them. I'll never forget being in a class with in my grad school program and saying, it's really annoying for people to say, what are you? And I remember my colleague turning around to me and saying, well, how else do we ask it? How do we ask it in a better way? And I said, maybe you can ask people, how do you identify racially, or how do you identify ethnically, instead of just saying, what are you? And everybody, of course, I want to be like, I'm a human. What are you asking? So learn people's stories and ask, and that will help you to avoid, not doing or saying the right thing. And like I said, the apology piece, don't make a scene. It is okay to just say, Anthony, I apologize for this thing, and move on. Because when you make a scene, you make it about you. You start to center yourself. And the reality is that we need to be centering the person in which the harm was done. So don't burden them with trying to make you feel better because you did something that hurt them. So really, really being mindful about that piece. It is okay to just say, I'm sorry, and I commit to doing better in the future. So then content warning, because some of the words that are going to be on the next slide may be a little bit triggering for folks, but I want to make sure that we talk through them. I think they're going to show up animated like one by one. I will go ahead and click through some of them and talk about some of them as well. So this is the big, oh, don't say that, right? These are those things that I typically talk with folks about that can tend to be a little unclear for folks. So a lot of people are like they ma'am, sir, woman, man, miss, Mr., ladies and gentlemen, hey guys, right? And so that is very specific to folks who identify as men or women, but really leaves out our folks who identify kind of along the spectrum of gender. I am infuriated when I'm in a room full of women and people are like, hey guys, and I'm like, wait, who are you talking to? And so thinking really about our words in that regard and how we can either be misgendering somebody or really just not reading the room. Hey guys is a language that really is specific, honestly, to men, but is very generic, general language that we use typically to refer to all people. I'll never forget interning in a cultural center. The director was a man, identified as a man, and every time somebody would be like, bye guys, he'd be like, who are the guys? Where are the guys at? This is a room full of women. Like, stop saying that. And so really thinking about how, hey guys really upholds the privilege of men and continues to oppress women in many ways. Next are these kind of pretty typical things that we see, right? He was a terrorist, they're illegal, that's gay, or no homo, that's ghetto, that exam raped me, it's retarded, don't be a pussy, man up, grammar Nazi. These are all things that we hear and experience in regular communication from people. And these aren't okay. And I think in a lot of ways, some people have learned along their journey that these aren't okay. But the truth is that in many ways, this is common language that people use, and they're not thinking about the way what that's ghetto means, right? They're not thinking about that ghetto is actually a place in which people live. It's not a characteristic of a human being. And so thinking about those kinds of things. The R word, that's a big one for, a lot of folks is it's just become so general language, and we're not thinking about the impact that it has on communities that identify as having mental disabilities or physical disabilities or whatever that may be. And so really thinking about how these words can, and these phrases, terms can impact those around us. There's also some more uncommon ones, I think ones we don't talk about as much. Girl, I think is a big one where it's, if we called men boys, they probably tend to get upset, where we feel really comfortable and confident calling grown women girls all of the time. I always say, I think there's a certain age where girls become women and we should address them as such. And girl has become such a common term in our language. So I feel like I constantly try to correct folks on that one. Slave is something that I think has been a very big part of our conversation recently, because people will talk about slaving away or whatever it may be, and understanding where that word is, what that word is rooted in, and the pain and harm and hurt that people experience actually being slaves. And so being thoughtful and intentional about our language, that that word actually means something. And so to not use it in that regard. Midget is another one that I think a lot of people use, and not understanding that that language has in fact changed, right? There was a time in our history, I think, when that people didn't talk about it as much, but the term now is little person, right? And really to use midget is a derogatory term towards that community. And so thinking about, are we really talking about a midget? Are we talking about a little person? What are we actually saying? Next is fit. We hear this a lot in the context of recruitment or friend groups. They just didn't fit. And fit is very much a coded word in many ways, as they don't fit XYZ. They're not white, they're not black, they're not man enough, they're not whatever it may be. Manpower, we typically use manpower to refer to all people. We could have a room full of women and be talking about the manpower. And so being really thoughtful about, again, what is that gender specific language that we're using. And then lastly, powwow, Indian style totem pole. All of these words relate back to indigenous or native cultures. And tribe is another one that we tend to hear, welcome to my tribe or my tribe of friends. And those, again, those words have literal meanings that aren't about some powwow chat that you want to have or about you being at the bottom of the totem pole. That's not what it's about. So what I'd like for you all to do is just think, what could you say instead? What are some of the words that you could be using instead, right? If you're calling somebody a midget, maybe you say they're short. Or if you're talking about the powwow that you're getting ready to have, maybe you're going to have a meeting or you're going to have a chat, and thinking about those kinds of things. So next is, I would love for you all, outside of words that I think we would acknowledged as extremely derogatory, the N word, the F word in relation to the LGBTQIA community, please feel free to drop other words, other phrases, other terms and statements that maybe you have heard throughout your life and in your experiences that maybe I didn't already cover, because the list that I gave you is not exhaustive by any means, but please feel free to continue to drop other things as well. As we move through, I want to talk a little bit about how to respond to these types of things, right? When you hear these types of words or experience exclusive language, how do you respond? These are all some really great options. I know there's a lot of words on the screen, but I want to make sure that we hit on all of them. The first thing is don't just tell people they're wrong or that they can't say that. That helps no one. They don't understand it. If it's a one-time thing, they're not really grasping why it's an issue. I did this for several years of just going around telling everybody, you can't say that, don't say that. And that doesn't actually help them understand what's wrong with the, with the comment or the phrase. And so maybe prying a little bit, tell me more about what you mean. And so we'll kind of get into that more. Giving grace, I've already talked about this, but making sure that in conversations around this topic, you are giving grace. Understanding that where you are at today may be different than the person that you're talking to, and where they're at today may have been where you were not too long ago. And so never forgetting kind of where you've been. Actively listening is wildly important. Don't listen to respond, listen to listen. Listen to hear them is really, really crucial in these types of conversations. One thing that I think is really great is, especially with friends or family, to say, I'm really happy that you feel comfortable enough around me to say XYZ, but I also want to explain to you why this bothers me, or why this hurts me, or why this hurts or bothers other people. If you don't feel like you're in a place to dialogue with the humans and like talk through it, being comfortable to say, I appreciate that you feel comfortable enough around me, but let's talk about why not. One of the best responses if somebody tells a nasty joke or a stereotypical comment or whatever is to say, what do you mean? To put it back in their court to explain the really hateful or nasty thing or derogatory thing that they've said can be really helpful for people. Because one, it says this isn't okay, this isn't normal, and I don't understand. And it kind of encourages or forces them into a space to have to explain what they're talking about. For some people, they don't even know what they're talking about. But for others, they're going to have to explain a lot of really biased information about themselves. Tell me more is also a really great example, similar to what do you mean, right? Tell me more about what you're saying. Help me understand where you're coming from. Another one is to say, it seems like this really upsets you. So if somebody was like, he's gay, right? I might say, that seems to really upset you. Tell me more about that. What gives you that kind of visceral reaction to this individual, and why did you use that language to refer to them, right? Next is, what is the root cause that makes you adverse to changing your language, doing this thing, engaging with this person? Because the truth is that you really just need to get to the root of the issue, ask all of the questions, and then kind of deconstruct from there. People don't learn by being talked at in this regard. They need to dialogue. They need to have a conversation. They need to be able to talk through it. So one of the last strategies that I typically give people is the yes and, right? It really comes off negatively when you say yes, but, or no, but, and there's all this but language. But if you can understand that yes, and, so I can hear what you're saying, and this is also true, can be a really helpful strategy in communicating with people. So these are my strategies. Feel free to take a picture. We'll probably send much of this out. But as we kind of move through, oh, good Lord, look at that. Oh my goodness. Okay, there. That was very bizarre. Sorry, friends. The concept of the fear of saying the wrong thing, right? So if you're worried about saying the wrong thing to someone, check in with them. Don't just let it go and not say anything about it, but check in with them either before or after the fact if you feel like you have said something wrong. Checking in with somebody is a way to also acknowledge, hey, I might have said or I might say something that's problematic, so I want to check in with you first, especially if it's a friend or a family member. Next is to ask a friend. So I always tell people, I will be your friend. If you're worried about saying something wrong or saying something problematic, ask somebody, right? You can ask me, you can ask another person that you feel like maybe has the context or knowledge, but asking a friend is always a great start. I recently had someone who did a presentation that ended up being pretty harmful and problematic. And she had said to me, well, Christina, I asked 15 of my friends, and all of them said, oh my gosh, yes, do that. It was a panel of white women talking about being white. And about 10 or more women of color expressed serious concern about the program. And she was able to communicate to me, Christina, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that all 15 of my friends who I asked also looked like me, were also white. I never took the opportunity to ask somebody who was different from me. So asking a friend who maybe is different from you can be helpful. Next is to Google it. Google can be your friend. Feel free to grab a book or grab Google or whatever you need. But I also truly believe that people have to dialogue about this conversation in order to actually make progress. And then last, just listen and ask questions from a genuine place, and be honest when you don't know what you don't know. The truth is what we permit, y'all, we promote. So if you are permitting things to happen in your space or things to occur and you're, around you in your presence, you are effectively promoting that. So every time somebody makes a joke about women or Black people or whatever it may be, and you say nothing, you are effectively promoting that and you're normalizing it for the other person. So a couple of reminders and tips. This is not an instant pot. This is not going to be quick. This is not an overnight fix. It is more like a slow cooker. It will take time. You will mess up. So be okay in that. The truth is we have to learn to create inclusive spaces in order to have representation. You will not retain diversity or representation without having an inclusive space. So a lot of people think it goes diversity and then inclusion, but in fact, I believe that it goes inclusion and then diversity, because you have to create that space for people to want to come and want to stay. Also, see some of the words, that we've talked about as a compliment to yours rather than a threat to yours, right? So a lot of men sometimes will be like, well, what's wrong with hey guys? And I'm like, nothing. It's just all about the way in which you use it, right? And so don't see them as a threat. And then as we've talked about, your intent does not negate your impact. So truly, y'all, the ultimate goal is to transform our language, to help us change our systems and our society, and to create a world that is better for all of us and not just some of us. We made these systems, our ancestors made these systems, so we have a social responsibility to change them. And ultimately, systems exist because we're all participating in them, so we all have a responsibility to help. Macklemore said, it's not going to solve it all, but it's a damn good place to start. So I believe that language is that start, that language is that place that we can start from in order to fulfill our social responsibility to other people. This is ZBT's opportunity, right, to fulfill the credo of social responsibility, to do better now that we know better, to give ourselves and others grace, and to acknowledge, respect, and affirm people's humanity through our language. And I hope that you will take that challenge as folks who showed up here tonight. Here are some resources that I always share with folks. There is a YouTube series out there through the BBC Three about what not to say. So it is for different communities and the things that you can say and not say. The article 10 Counterproductive Behaviors of Well-Intentioned People by Cody Charles, who is a student affairs professional at the University of Kansas, is a really great read for folks who are worried about their intention and how their impact lands. Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People is a great book, great starter book for just general understanding of implicit bias and kind of how we got to where we are today. Embedded within the Blind Spot book are IAT tests. So that is the implicit association test through Harvard University that you can get on and do for free, actually online, whether in the book or outside of the book. And you can take those tests to kind of understand your bias. There are literally tests for women and men and Black folks and brown folks and gun violence and all different kinds of ones that you can get on and do. So that is it. That is what we have tonight. You feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. I know that there were a couple of comments in the chat, but I really, really, really appreciate everybody's time tonight. And so thank you. But I will give a second for questions. I usually give people a little bit of time to think, so feel free to keep thinking, keep thinking. Well, if there are no questions or any thoughts, please feel free to connect with me. I will go ahead and drop my email in the chat. So if you need to get in touch with me, you're free to email me. But thank you all, and I hope everybody has a great evening. Bye-bye. Thanks, Anthony.